Hello. It is so good to see you and be with you, Daphne. I am delighted that you have agreed to have a conversation with me today about being a wise woman and being part of our series on elders speaking. I know a little bit about you, uh, and I know that for whatever reason you decided to have a little one and to nurse your baby. And I would love for you to introduce yourself and tell us more about that. Thank you.
Well, I'm Daphne Williams. Oh, and I've had several wonderful lives, all sort of contemporaneously. Before I became a mother, I had a life in the theater as well as a day job, which is the short version. But talking about birth and parenting and nursing specifically, I had the advantage. I was born to teenage parents in the late 40s. And what I know about my family, all four of my grandparents were alive when I was born and present in my life. Both of my grandmothers had children at home and nursed them. On the other hand, as a teenager, had two unmedicated, but hospital births. And decided she was going to be scientific, and she was systematically stopped from breastfeeding. She got sore nipples, and they made her clean her nipples with rubbing alcohol.
Is this your mom?
My mother.
And can you tell us your mother's name?
My mother's name is Annie Hannah Mathis. That was
Annie Hannah Mathis.
All of her life she was called Anne,
okay.
Which was given to me as my middle name. So I'm her, next generation. But she stopped. I was a formula fed baby, and I was allergic to cow's milk and soy and hospitalized more than once as an infant because of, food issues.
Wow.
And that's part of the stories of my childhood from my mother. My mother always felt guilty that she didn't nurse me.
Mm-hmm.
But long story short, I never saw anyone nurse a baby. Because in the middle of the 20th century, everybody was bottle feeding because the doctors told them to. I left home relatively early and went out on my own. And I'm going to give a plug because in the middle of the 20th century, there was a great explosion of self-help books. And I have a short list of about half a dozen books that I think helped me realize myself, that and the reflection on what I knew about my biological background, my grandparents particularly.
Yeah.
The most important one was, and here's the plug.
Wow, I've got that book.
Of course you do. And I even have the 90s version.
Oh, wow.
It was such a wealth of information. I benefited. Ms. Magazine led me to Our Bodies, Ourselves in the 70s. From Our Bodies, Ourselves and the bibliography in the back of each chapter, I read other things, and I discovered all sorts of information about what I think of as behavior that comes out of the environment of evolutionary adaptiveness, being close to your baby, nursing, all sorts of the ecology of the mother-baby dyad.
You mean attachment? Attachment? They're
Yeah.
attached to you?
Then I lucked out. I had a good female friend who got married and had a couple of kids, and she nursed, and I was with her and was able to share in that experience with her. So
was she older than you?
No, she was really my age.
Okay.
I put off becoming a mother for a long time, and we'll talk about the political reality. I terminated 2 pregnancies, one in my teens and one in my 20s, because I knew I was not prepared to be a parent.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was 32 when I did finally have a home birth.
Mm-hmm.
And I luckily had a wonderful midwife practice to care for me during my pregnancy and and attend my birth maternity center, which no longer exists.
Yeah, I was going to say, call their names because I know they're not there anymore.
Oh, Jan Epstein, Megan
Yes,
McCartney, my
yes,
midwife, Charlene Santiago. And
yes.
I actually had the wonderful experience of having Sally Mendelson, who was Robert Mendelson, the guy who wrote
Oh, wow.
Male Practice, you know. She was my midwife assistant at my,
Wow. Wow.
but maternity center had a support system. It included Esther Herman, who I believe was a retired La Leche leader.
Mm.
She provided the education, the preparation for nursing. I went through a whole series of birth classes that were geared to home birth. So I was very prepared for all of it. And I had a home birth, very successful home birth with lots of people in the house. And the nursing got off to a good start. My son nursed like a champ. If I had a problem, I called Esther Herman.
And I want to add here, just for the historical record, that when I did home births, one of the things that we required people to do is to not just to consider, but to commit to nursing their babies.
Absolutely.
And one of there were, it was rare, but there were notable exceptions where people told us, well, I want to have this baby at home and I want you guys to do it, and you guys are really cool and all of that, but I'm unable or unwilling, or what if I can't nurse my baby? And we really had to have some talks about not just how to support that woman, but could we take this person on if they weren't able, or at least weren't willing to give it a good try. So you had made me remember that, and I forgotten. I was not in that home birth practice, but there.
Well, it's a biological whole.
Yes. Yeah.
The idea that is it must, I think it was Sheila Kissinger who said that the medical model of pregnancy is that you're ill, that you're sick, you know, because it's a departure from normal. Whereas the midwife model of pregnancy is that it's an altered state of normal. And in that altered state of normal, the baby is part of your whole, and you are the baby's environment, not only while you're pregnant, but in the first 18 to 24 months after the birth, because that really, in the environment of evolutionary adaptiveness, and I use that term a lot, a child is not prepared to walk and travel and forage and eat independently of the mother until it's about 4 to 6 years old.
Yes. Yes.
That is a remarkable fact when you think about it.
Yes. Yeah.
So my experience of nursing was a good one. I lucked out, I found a pediatrician who had nursed her own children while she was in medical school. And she was European, Agnes Schweitzer, a wonderful, lovely woman, who came to my house the day after my son was born to examine him, and was very helpful with everything. In my family, there's sensitivity to cow's milk proteins. And so we had to work around some of that in the first stages of nursing. And I had to get through a couple of weeks of really sore nipples, you know. And my mother kept saying to me, you know, this may not work. Because she was remembering, you know, what had happened to her.
Yes. Was your mom at your birth?
Yes, she was
Wow.
on the bed. Yeah. And interesting, because she said to me, I never knew what birth looked like. She said, they didn't medicate me, but I was covered up with sheets. I had no idea what anything looked like. And there I am wearing a t-shirt that says "Save the Whales." You know, and everything from the waist down hanging out. My mother I had an out-of-body experience giving birth. I found myself looking down on myself and thinking to myself, gee, my mother is in a lot of pain. I'm not a terribly mystical personality. But then that's the one time that's ever happened to me. And I know it happens because of endorphins.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's your body protecting you, separating you from the physical experience of pushing this huge thing,
Yeah.
a very small opening.
Yeah. And if I can share, as a midwife, having mothers talk about that mother-baby dyad, that mother-baby couple, that there are times when you completely become the baby and the baby completely becomes you. And I've heard women describe that out-of-body experience, and other women have said, oh, for that moment, I became fully one and conscious with my baby. And I could see my baby watching me. And I just thought, wow, that is mystical.
It's fabulous.
Wow.
We are biological creatures. And I'm a big fan. I actually like being a biological creature. I think Western civilization has this idea that you should separate your consciousness from your physical self, and don't do that. I very often ask myself, what would I have done, in 500 years ago or thousands of years ago in a purely biological setting, and go with it. So I do have a narrative here, and I'm going to go back to the nursing.
Yes.
Really well. I had no issues. I have to talk about employment. I took a 6-month leave of absence, maternity leave, from my government job, and stayed home for 6 months with my son. This was almost unheard of when I did it. He was born in
1981. Thank you.
They allowed you to do it. It was leave without pay. Most of it was. But so my son was nursed for 6 months, 100%. Everything was great. He started solid food. I went back to work in the fall after he was born. He was born in March. I went back to work like in October, and Ronald Reagan got elected and riffed a bunch of us. So I worked from October, November, December, and was unemployed starting in January. But I had converted myself to part-time. And because I did that, I was allowed to look for part-time work in the federal government, which it's a very little known fact that you can do that. I was able to reject full-time work, and almost nobody offered part-time work in the federal government in those days. I then got to stay home almost another year.
Wow.
While I looked for a job.
See how it matters who's president?
So you don't want me to talk about rape. Nevertheless, when my son was still nursing at 18 months, my mother started saying ugly things, both to me and to him, because she felt he was doing it to make her feel bad. And I had to say to her, if it makes you uncomfortable, we won't do it in front of you, but don't say anything to him, because it's very important. And it's a really important part. He slept in the bed with his dad and me, and that until he was school age. I actually made him a separate bed, and he slept in the room with us for a long time. We had a very sort of sleeping in a little huddle, but the way I never went to a La Leche League meeting until my son was 18 months old. And I called Esther Herman and said, I whined. And she said, you've actually had a very good experience of all of this, and you really should go to La Leche League and get involved, because you could help other people. And I took it to heart, and I showed up at the DC meeting with Marianne Welter and Ginger Welch. And I did get the support I was looking for nursing a toddler. It was wonderful. I made friends that, I've had for the rest of my life. Some of the most important people in my life. Got it that way. My son fit right into the middle of Ginger's 4 children, and we spent lots and lots and lots of time together. Not long after I got involved, I started the process of becoming a leader This is another plug. This is the Bible. You know, everyone who has a baby should have one, I think. Oh, my favorite baby book was this one.
Okay, Penelope, wow.
Yes,
Wow.
Penelope Leach, Your Baby and Child.
Yeah.
I don't keep many books, but these are important to me. I still have them.
Mhm. I want to comment, I have all those books and I keep a lot of books and I still have it. Yeah.
That's right. I mean, the womanly art of breastfeeding is still, it's the world authority. They now have a website, the International La Leche League. I get a Facebook feed from them. I see what they do internationally. They've worked really hard at inclusion. And I'm part of that. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that.
I would love to hear that.
To become a leader. And I filled out the application. I did the reading, you know, I did all the requirements. And they sent my application back and said, talk to us about the construct of the full-time mother, which was it was one of the bedrock principles of La Leche League, the founding mothers. And I kind of said, well, yeah, it's great for the mother to be available to the infant as much as possible. And I worked really hard on that, you know, because I took a 6-month maternity leave. I was completely available. I sent my application, and a second time they sent it back and said, tell us more about the construct of the full-time mother. Well, I had gone back to work before my child was 3 years old, which was, as far as they were concerned,
Heresy.
well, it meant that you weren't a full-time mother.
Mhm.
And I got mad, and I wrote them a feminist treatise in which I said to them, the construct of the full-time mother is a white middle-class fantasy.
Mhm.
Women have worked for centuries.
Mhm.
Majority of women have to work in order to feed their child, much less mother. And if the only people who deserve the attention of La Leche League and the support of La Leche League are women whose husbands can support them and allow them to be available 100% of the time, then you're eliminating a fairly major percentage of mothers. And I think all mothers and babies deserve support. I was told later that the person who was the coordinator of leader applicants in our area resigned because she didn't want to certify me. And they did certify me as a leader.
Wow. Wow.
And it was at that point, this is in the 80s, that breast pumps are becoming widely available and women are going back to work and looking for spaces and privacy and support for pumping while they're at work. And I was kind of in on the ground floor of that. And it's also in that I was a leader while they created the job of lactation consultant.
Mhm.
And I decided that was not my ambition in life. I spent a lot more time on the phone with mothers who either had babies with problems or they needed medical care. I can think of one example in particular where the child had metabolic issues and diagnosed prenatally. And at one point, that mother was told that her child had rickets because the breast milk wasn't providing
Oh my God.
nutrition.
Oh my God.
I remember saying to the mother, you're full of crap. This baby we know has metabolic issues. She had kidney problems and other problems before she was born. Mother was African-American. She was a mechanic for Metro, and the medical facility that was caring for her was big and sophisticated, and they were not interested in information from the mother. And I helped her navigate the process of giving them information.
Yeah. Yeah.
and insisting that she was not the cause. And so eventually they figured out that the baby didn't metabolize vitamin D properly and they had to supplement her food, but the nursing was not the cause of the rickets.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
When
this,
when in doubt, blame the mother.
and assume that the mother is too stupid to argue with you.
Yeah.
So I every step of the way from my youth all the way up to today is a sort of a feminist process of saying, what is it about this situation that irritates me? And it has to do with how women are marginalized,
Mhm. Mhm.
diminished in the larger world.
Mhm.
Um,
For wanting to be with their babies, for wanting to be with
wanting to be with their
babies.
baby.
Yeah.
I nursed my son. This is circling back around. My son nursed until he was 4,
Mhm.
but that last year it wasn't even every day. On the other hand, I was not interested in weaning him forcefully.
Mhm.
It was real important to him, that closeness, and it was a kind of emotional shorthand,
Mhm.
being able to relax with him in
Mhm.
privacy.
Mhm.
I remember when we stopped nursing in public, I was on a bus holding him or standing up, and he reached down my shirt. And I had to say to myself, not doing this in public anymore.
Mhm.
In our culture, it's really shocking for other people to see a child that walks and talks come up and say, I want to nurse,
Mhm.
On the other hand, I have no regrets about doing it. My son remembers nursing. He's 42 almost.
Mhm.
He has very positive memories of that experience. And when he was in high school, he came home and said to me, Mom, one of my classmates is pregnant and I need to know what to say to her about nursing.
Wow.
Maybe encourage her to do it.
Wow.
I
Wow.
thought, wow,
Well done. Well done.
such a, because teenage boys are so weird about all sorts of things. And I thought, this is really remarkable because I didn't bring it up.
Mhm. But he was thoughtful enough to not only think about that, but to come to you and say, Ma, can you help? Can you help me help her? I want to do this for her.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And it was important to him. We have an excellent relationship that survived, all the bumps and scrapes in life through adolescence and early adulthood. And he went into the military, was in the military for 10 years. And
Mhm. Is he back in the States now? Is he back
oh
home?
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
he's been out of the military for more than a decade, and he does network security and information technology kind of work. And in fact, I have him. He has a house in West Virginia.
Oh, okay.
He also is. I own a second apartment down the hall, and he stays there part of the time because his physical job is in Virginia.
Okay. Okay. Last time we talked, I knew he was away, living overseas or somewhere.
All over the place.
So close at home, close
The
to mom
pandemic
again. Yeah.
had a lot to do with everything sort of stabilizing.
And he's 42 now? Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amber just turned 42 and Jordan just turned on the 20th, turned 48. So this is dizzying.
Right in the same bailiwick. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I enjoyed the experience of mothering as a nursing mother as probably as much as anything else in my life. I dressed in overalls and t-shirts so that I could bear, that much of myself in order to be out and about with my kid. I felt really free because all I ever needed to leave the house with was a diaper. I didn't need a big bag full of equipment. although my kid liked to eat on the go, so I was very often carrying around snacks. We did a lot of getting out and roaming around because we were in the city.
Mhm.
I used to walk half a block, get on the bus, ride down 14th Street. And when my son was walking, he learned to walk. He spent a lot of time in the Smithsonian Natural History Museum, crawling from one animal exhibit to the next.
Were you on Swan Street then, or
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So he really knew his neighborhood and knew how to get around. Yeah.
That's right.
Do you recall did you do any pumping? Did you, were you, when you?
No, I didn't have to. I didn't need to, because by the time I went back to work that first time, I had worked out. My son's dad was with him when I wasn't. We traded off days. I worked 3 days a week and he worked 3 days a week. And that was marvelous. And by the time I went back to work, there were no bottles. And my son never took a bottle because he was already starting to eat solid foods. And so if I wasn't present, he ate other stuff.
Mhm.
The one thing I did do was I had traveled a lot before he was born for my job.
Mhm.
And I let everybody know that that was no longer possible, that I just wasn't willing to go and leave an infant, even overnight. My mom
Mhm.
fussed at me for a long time because I wouldn't let him sleep over at her house. He was still nursing.
Mhm.
She was a wonderful grandmother. You know, I talk about the negative stuff, but she was just a wonderful grandmother and very much present and accounted for in his life as a small child. She would take any time she could get.
Mhm.
He only lived about a mile away from me. They lived on 6th Street
Oh,
for the
okay.
first like 3 years of Alex's life. And then they moved to a community on the western shore of the bay called Scientist Cliffs.
Mhm.
And we went back and forth down there a lot.
Mhm. Mhm. The reason I asked that question is one of the other things that I was noticing why I wanted to have this conversation with you and other people was that I was meeting many women who were breastfeeding, but not nursing. And spent a lot of extraordinary amount of money, equipment, time, and energy to provide what they thought was a wholesome commodity for their baby. But they were also very clear that nursing, the actual physical attachment, was not something either that they were welcoming or not something that they could do. Or what I was also increasingly hear that their partner, male or female, this was not gender specific, which I thought was real interesting, felt left out. And so in order to equalize whatever, they had to make the hard decision not to nurse so that the partner could nurse or their mom could nurse or their mom felt jealous. And it just, I mean, my head almost exploded, not so much because I was angry, but I was just like, what happened? What happened? You know, and being on a dairy farm, no, really, Daphne, this is funny.
Yes, we are mammals.
It really hit me that they were mimicking what had happened in the dairy industry.
Yes, the equipment getting in the middle.
Yes, and I was having this emotional reaction when you were saying about mystical experience. My mystical cow experience was it is common on dairy farms to separate the baby from the mom within hours. And I saw these mothers, cow mothers cry and baby mothers cry. They could actually physically see each other. And like the farmers would kind of be on autopilot. And switching back to we're being mammals, I was talking to these women and they were trying to explain to me, like I wasn't very bright, that they were committed to breastfeeding, but they were committed to getting milk into their baby, and that whatever this thing was where they would be attached to their baby, was problematic.
Well,
Yeah.
one of the wonderful things, you've just given me the opportunity to talk about La Leche League. The founding mothers, 8 women in the middle of the 20th century, knew things from their experience and from other mothers they had learned from that we have only been able to scientifically validate 70 years later.
Yes. Yeah.
One of the things we know now that they didn't have good scientific evidence for is that they told everybody that breastfeeding confers immunities, which it does, but they didn't have words like macrophages and neurotransmitters. One of the latest developments in breastfeeding is that they now understand that the way the mother's body fine-tunes the milk is that in the act of suckling, there's backwash from the infant's mouth to the mother's body, which provides information to the mother's brain, which allows her body to, fine-tune the milk. Milk is a living tissue. It is not a commodity. You can't replicate it in a jar. I have said often that the founding mothers of La Leche were a radical feminist guerrilla organization because they had this idea that they had the best information and they were determined that it was going to get out there. And of course, now the World Health Organization recognizes that they are the world authority on infant feeding. But it's been a long process. A mother who says that breast milk is only for nutrition really doesn't want to know what the biological process is, because the biological process requires intimacy. It requires closeness. It requires the skin-to-skin contact, the actual suckling at the breast. When I counseled women who were pumping at the office, I would say to them, you have to develop a relationship with the breast pump. It's an intermediary. Because there's something that triggers, your brain triggers the body to let go of the milk, to produce the milk for the baby. Generally speaking, putting the infant to the breast triggers that response. The body goes, oh yeah, there it is, the suckling. Give it all you got.
Mm-hmm.
A breast pump doesn't produce the same sensation. We are mammals.
And if you experience, if you experience this disconnect, and you don't have words and you don't have somebody to talk to, I love the story. I mean, I see the story, but I remember telling a woman, she had to go to work. She was at work and she was not getting a letdown. And I said, I know how to get a letdown. So she said, what? And I said, call. And the physical, this was pre-cell phones, but she would actually call, clearly the baby couldn't answer the phone, but she would call the babysitter. I can't remember who it was now. And she would say, bring the baby to the phone.
Yeah.
And she would talk to the baby and you would hear the baby talk to her.
Vocalize.
And she said, Jackie, the milk would start flowing in my lap. And I thought I had lost my mind. I thought, I didn't even know what to say. And she said, why you told me to do that? I said, well, you were telling me you were having problems with letdown. And I wondered if that would help. And I think back to what you were saying about women having to work, women have always worked.
Yes.
This isn't something that just got invented, but this notion that to separate yourself from your baby and to separate yourself from your work, that's the new piece.
Mm-hmm.
That's the new piece. And if you're in the middle, how do you negotiate that? How do you make that happen? And how do you address clearly what you were saying about your mom, about her own, not just guilt, but in her viewing you, she got to grieve what she missed. And
Yes.
that's the other cool thing about grandmas, they get to relive it, replay it, or steal it from you, however the case may be. But I really appreciate you sharing that. I know we're getting close to the end. Is there something that you could share about your experience with having, I mean, it sounds like you created your own universe. I love the bubble idea. But was there anything that made nursing for you hard, or made decisions that you made around nursing, especially as you extended the time, more troublesome for you?
When I did go back to work, the 3 months in the first year,
Mm-hmm.
one of the first things that happened to me was I had given up wearing a bra, and I put on and almost immediately I developed mastitis, the hot spot, the temperature, the whole.
Uh-huh.
And after a couple of experiences of doing that, I decided wearing a bra was just, I wasn't going to do that anymore. I haven't worn a bra for 40 years.
Can you again, remember, people don't know, I know what you're talking about. Can you explain the relationship?
Yes. Mastitis is when something constricts, because you have milk producing tissue up under your arms and in the undersides of your breasts. It restricts the flow through the ducts of the milk, and it gets stuck essentially, and it forms, if allowed to go on without being alleviated, you can actually wind up with open sores. I mean, it can be pretty awful and excruciating, but I knew enough, here again, having had the kind of resources that I had, I recognized it right away what it was. And I took off the bra and I applied heat and massaged to get everything moving again. And, it was alleviated. And once I stopped wearing a bra, I never had mastitis again.
Mm-hmm. I saw on Facebook a woman talking about going to a lactation massage therapist, and the purpose of the visit was to get her breast massaged to help her. I don't know if she had developed mastitis, but it helped her to keep the flow. She was someone who was pumping quite a bit, but I was just,
there you are.
wow.
A modern solution for.
Well, I was going to say the way that we adapt, but there wasn't conversation in the chat about how you get to that point, and how, and I know I'm dating myself here. I think if a woman wants to nurse, how do we build this bubble with her and around her that allows her to do that? If you don't want to and you can't, or there are other things, I'm fine with that too. I think there's room for everybody to do what they want. Maybe that's my feminist thing. But if someone doesn't know something's possible, it's like if you don't even know what you don't know,
right?
How do we address
that is a conundrum, because for decades myself, because the information, what I discovered was that information was out there, at least in the middle of the 20th century. It was, when I was young. But
like a mid-century modern house.
You had to know to go looking for it. If you didn't have the wise woman, sitting there personified by your grandmother or your mother. And I was enormously curious about all of it. I'm not sure why. I knew I wanted to be a mother. I had cared for lots of other people's children when I was a teenager. I have a brother who's 12 years younger than I am, and I for him, the whole time he was little. Mother actually said to me that having experienced his childhood that I was very brave to get pregnant and become. He was a high energy child. He was adopted. And my mother, at the age of 30, when he was adopted, she thought, I took care of all my brothers and sisters. I've had 2 children. I know what there is to know about babies. And he upended everything.
Everything she thought she did. Thank goodness he had a sister mom.
And what that did really for me was it prepared me when I was a La Leche League leader to hear stories of projectile vomiters and, all of these things, and to weigh in and say, oh yes, this all falls within the spectrum of normal.
Normal, yeah.
Um,
It's not a pathology that needs an ICU.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a very wide spectrum.
Yeah.
You asked if I had problems. My son got teeth at 4 months. And I went through a very short period of him biting me. First to tell me he wanted to nurse, but also in the middle of the night, he would latch on and then he would let the nipples slip out and he would bite. And of course, this is not the way you want to be waked up. And I, responded by saying, no, don't do that. But the solution to that was to make sure he was firmly latched on and, we weren't just, sleepy and mouthing the nipple.
Yeah.
Biting feels good, when you're a little kid. And I taught him a word so that he could tell me when he wanted to nurse so he wouldn't bite me. I had a big bite mark on my shoulder for a while.
Oh, wow.
But a lot of people stop nursing when their kid gets teeth. And I didn't. Mine had a whole mouthful of teeth by the time,
Yeah.
And it never caused a problem once he learned not to bite.
Right. Once you taught him not to bite you.
Right.
That's the thing about relationships. We can negotiate relationships.
When he was 2 years old, he would sit up in the bed and in the middle of the night and be awake. And I would say to him, it's nighttime. It's time to sleep. And he would lay back down, and we would go back to sleep.
Yeah.
Luckily, he wasn't like my younger brother, and he didn't get up and roam around the house in the middle of the night. If that had happened, I would have probably been up with him, because I remembered that part.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
My son was actually quite amenable to, he liked being with mom and dad physically in the bed.
Mm-hmm.
His father called him a heat-seeking missile because if he was in the bed by himself, you know how you have sleep cycles, he would root around with his feet. And if he found a warm body, he would put his feet against the warm body and he would go back to sleep. But if there was no big warm body in the bed, he would wake up.
Yeah. That makes the nighttime ritual a little creative.
Yes. But one of my biggest fears about becoming a mother was sleep deprivation. I'm not good unless I've had enough sleep. And I have to say that nursing and having him in the bed, present, not having to wake up fully, really, most of the time that he nursed at night, I got plenty of sleep.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear you say that, because I used to tell people, said, oh, how did you breastfeed when you were in college? How did you get enough sleep? And I said, I don't know, I was asleep. I think that had I tried to mother differently, I probably would not have graduated from college because I would not have gotten any sleep. And I think I shared this with my conversation with Ginger, and she remembered me saying that his dad, my husband was saying, what kind of mother doesn't wake up with their baby? I said, the one that's got to get up and need some sleep. That's the kind that doesn't do that. And they all figured out how to do it, all of a sudden, don't you have to sit up? Don't you have to? I said, I don't know what I have to do. I know I have to go to sleep and I know I have to go to class. That's what I know I have to do. And I suspect that a lot of these things we're laughing and giggling about, for some women, are really more than speed bumps. They really stop them in their tracks. And if you don't have, one, the information, but also the support system, there are many women who say, the decision not to nurse or having to stop nursing had to do with what I'm going to just loosely call jealousy. Like if you have to negotiate the relationship this relationship that you have with this being,
Ownership.
yes, with someone else who is important to you. It was like me or my husband, me or my girlfriend, me or my mom, me or my whatever. That's a level of conflict that not only does not support intimacy, but could also support a whole lot of trauma for someone who hasn't really thought about, do I have to pick between these two people when this is something that I want to do or need to do?
Well, conversations beforehand help. If a woman is seeking, preparation for nursing. I was lucky because my son's father had been breastfed. And so he was
You chose well.
basically, okay with all of that. He didn't see it as he didn't, and I would never have allowed him to say, I own your body. This child that doesn't have access. As far as I'm concerned, the child comes out of your body, they have priority access in a lot of ways. But the physical relationship with me extended to the father because he also had a really nice, warm physical relationship with our son. I know in La Leche League meetings, we talked about fathers and attitudes and preparation and what the father can do and participate in order to feel supportive. Some men get it right away and some don't. I can remember men calling and asking if they could come to the meetings. Wife either didn't want to or couldn't. That was an interesting problem.
Yeah.
Moved to this building 20 some years ago. One of the first things that happened was a couple moved in down the hall and they were pregnant. And she had a maternity center birth, a birthing center birth. But I made friends with them and said to them, I'm an old hand at this, feel free, call me, come down the hall. Sure enough, after they came home, the next day, the husband came down the hall barefoot and knocked on my door and said, could you come down and talk to my wife? Because we're under a lot of stress right this minute. She hasn't slept, basically. And I remember sitting in the room with her in my flannel nightgown and sort of helping her relax. And because the baby he was crying a lot and she wasn't sleeping and there was tension building. And I showed her how to hold the baby in a football hold and calm him down. And he started to nurse. And I remember turning to the husband and saying, okay, and your job in all of this is to make sure she has plenty of water to drink, to do the laundry, to let her sleep, stay in her pajamas so that she sleeps when the baby sleeps, so that she does get some rest right away. And it was yes, yes. And they went on to have 4 children. They're still friends. But I could tell right away that he got it, that he was going to be fine. And once she got a little sleep, she was going to be fine too. The politics of gender in Love were very interesting. And we could probably talk about that for another whole hour. Because there are some very traditional, conventional families where the husband is the head and the wife is the subordinate, and the husband makes all the decisions. And of course, I don't see life that way. Really not the mother-baby dyad. I see the mother as being really the determining person. What happens with the baby. That was an interesting process for me.
Yeah. Well, this is a good place for us to close. And I love what you're saying, because it also reminds me that many women from very traditional hierarchical families learn to have their voice with their husbands, their partners, their brothers, their mothers, because of becoming a mother.
Right.
And I was so, it was so gracious to witness that happening, that that they found their sphere of negotiating these things.
Mhm.
And thanks for that reminder. Thanks for well, it's a delight to talk with you and have this conversation. I would like
It's
to
been my pleasure, Jackie. Thank you.
thank you for bringing so many things to mind, but also telling your own special story. Uh, I'd like to thank your son
Oh,
for
yeah.
being in there with you in that mother baby dyad and growing to a full on 42-year-old age, who sounds like a wonderful person. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.